It's not starting from day one. Now, the only time I do have that is if somebody has a specific program for themselves in which they count it as starting back from day one. But for me, no, no, I'm not about to let you throw away those 30 days like they did not have.
What's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast, where we highlight underrepresented journeys of sobriety, growth, and healing from within the BIPOC community. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, and I'm looking forward to this show today. Oftentimes in communities of color, we have a ton of apprehension when it comes to seeking out therapy. It's been a theme that's come up on multiple episodes of this podcast, and certainly it's something that I felt personally. So for that reason, I wanted to open up the dialogue some. So today we have Jeny joining us, who's a licensed mental health professional. She specializes in substance abuse, and we're really just going to get into it from a practitioner's perspective on what does addiction look like, how can we look at it from the standpoint of our community, and really just have like a robust dialogue around what mental health looks like within our community and how we can better support ourselves. So without further ado, Jeny, welcome to the...
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I want to humanize this a little bit because I feel like, folks of color, myself certainly, we think about practitioners in the medical field and we don't oftentimes humanize them. So maybe you could just walk us back and like give us a sense of how you even got into this space in the first place, because I'm in Colorado. It was really difficult for me to find a therapist of color in the first place. So I'm going to assume it's a very, very homogenized area and profession to be in. So how did you find yourself gravitating towards the space of being a mental health professional?
Sure. So actually back in maybe 2012, I was already working at a mental health facility, and I was actually running across a lot of people dealing with addiction and mental health. But I noticed the mental health was being more addressed and addiction was kind of being like a secondary or swept under the rug. So it made me kind of drawn to it actually. And then from there, I went and finished my master's and decided to get licensed as an addictions counselor. And that's kind of how I've been doing it ever since. I do have addiction within my family that also made me want to, address this more, especially within our community. So that's really how I got started.
Do you recognize kind of a through line when it comes to folks of color, pursuing therapists, and how do you help kind of quell some of that apprehension that folks might be coming into your office with?
Yes, there definitely is a line in the sand when it comes to therapy of any kind for African Americans. It's becoming less stigmatized, but it is still very much so an issue. And I believe that's mostly related to a lot of our history, how we have been brought up, going all the way back to, civil rights movement and what that looked like. We weren't always taught to express feelings. Expressing feelings could have been dangerous. And a lot of that is still being passed on and passed down within family lines, even when we don't realize it. So the way that I try to break that stigma up and encourage people, first of all, is through my social media platform. I'm myself. So the normal stuff that you might see a Black woman do, you're going to see me do. And that makes people feel more like, oh, that's okay. Like I got my Black Therapist Matter shirt and I will do my videos in it. And I will let people know that Black people can go to therapy. We need to go to therapy. We need to receive the help that we need to get so that future generations, this doesn't even have to be a conversation. It could be so normalized that it's just like going to your PCP. That's my ultimate goal for what I do.
That's awesome. I appreciate your you being unapologetic about the role that you play in this kind of broader ecosystem. And I think it's really important. Like I said, it was really hard for me to find a person of color, and for someone who is coming from a place of having an addiction and a substance use issue, you want to be somewhere where you feel safe, right? And I think that for me, that was the biggest hurdle to get over, because I probably shopped around, for lack of a better term, and I probably talked to 3 or 4, therapists, specialists, before finding my current practitioner, who again is a woman of color. And every time I was just like, you know what, this just doesn't feel like it's fitting. And no knock on the people, but at the end of the day, there's just a cultural misalignment that you
Hmm.
can't avoid, when you're trying to to touch on some things that are really, really deeply ingrained in who one is.
Yes. Yes. I would say, in Colorado, you definitely, I'm pretty sure you ran into a lot of barriers trying to find a person of color. I'm in Louisiana, so there's more of us, but there's not necessarily a lot of us who focus on addiction. It's like the stigma inside of stigma almost. So if mental health is a stigma, addiction is even deeper into that. So it's, it's a little deeper even than just going to therapy sometimes.
Yeah. So let's talk about, like, let's break it out, right? Let's talk about, you have mental health on one side, right? And then you have addiction, sobriety, recovery.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about those two pieces and what the connective tissue is between those two from your perspective as a provider?
Sure. So the biggest thing I would say is that people could probably relate to is depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety are very common. People may not be formally diagnosed, but at some point when it gets to be a problem and they go to therapy, they may become. But that is, connected to the mental health side. Now, a person can have an addictive disorder without the depression or the anxiety. And a lot of times when that does happen, that's what stops people from getting help. So if a person has a problem with alcohol, but they don't necessarily experience depression, or they don't feel like anxiety is a problem, or they just have never felt like that mental health piece, they don't see the connection between mental health and whether or not they can have sobriety and whether or not recover, what their recovery would look like. And to go a step further, we are whole. We are one person. So our physical health, mental health, and addictive disorders, they would all go together because whether or not my liver is functioning good is going to matter when I'm trying to go into recovery for alcohol, or whether or not I have already damaged my pancreas, and so on and so forth. So I think they actually all connect together. But I think a lot of times mental health has become destigmatized, but specifically within that, addictive disorders have not become destigmatized at all.
When you so in your experience, do you have do folks generally come to you specifically for mental health disorders, or are they coming to you more so for the addictive disorders that they're trying to manage and get over? Because in my experience, I wanted to tackle my alcohol use and didn't recognize that anxiety even played a role in that for me until I started getting into it some. And I was like, I never really thought of myself as an anxious person, but now that, like, I've removed the alcohol, I'm starting to see
Yeah.
that certain anxieties are showing up for me. So I'm curious, like, what are you seeing coming to your doorstep? Are people coming to you because they're trying to, try to battle some sort of mental health issue, or are they coming to you for the substance abuse and then recognizing there may be some mental health issues that come with that?
I would say 8 times out of 10, people come to me and say, "Hey, I'm having trouble coping at work, or my anxiety is out of control." And it's once I get to assessing them, they'll reveal, "Oh, yeah, I drink a 6 pack a day." But they may not even see the 6 pack a day as an issue.
Right.
So it'll happen a lot of times like that. Or even I would say it usually takes for there to be some catalyst before people come to me straight up for addiction. So whether it's at work or they've got a DUI or DWI, then they may come and say, "Hey, this is what's going on." But most times it's going to be, I don't know, my wife just seems to be acting different towards me. And she says that, I have an attitude and I'm this and I'm that. And then when we assess it, it's, oh, because you're drinking so often, you're not remembering some of the things that you're doing to her. And so we need to look at that whole piece. So that's mostly how it happens because most people don't even, either because of that stigma, they don't want to admit straight up that they have that issue, or they literally just don't even see it as an issue. Like I said, I'm in Louisiana, specifically very close to New Orleans.
They don't drink at
Drinking
all in New
is
Orleans.
Oh, never. Not a thing for us at all. We
Yeah.
don't have drive-through daiquiri shops, not at all. So, it's very normalized here, very normalized. So to even get to a point where you can say, "Oh, this is really causing issues for me," it's a big, big, big step. So that's usually how it comes. That's how people come to me.
I mean, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, but you talked a little bit about coping. What is your process? Just and this just can be just like a generalized hypothetical patient that comes to you,
Sure.
right? Like, what is the process that you walk them through to address both of those very meaningful buckets? So let's make the assumption that we've already identified that they have some mental health
Hmm.
attention that needs to be made, right? And then also they're trying to get over some substance abuse issues. What's the process look like from day one? Maybe you can give us a little bit of light, shine some light into that.
Sure.
That's the first question I have. And then secondly, being that you're in New Orleans, how do you equip them so they can walk back out into the real world and cope with what is just the pervasive culture of the city that you live in?
So to answer the first one, you call me up or however we get in contact and I set you up for an appointment. That first appointment is going to be a full-on assessment. It's just going to be us talking about what has life looked like for you up until the time you have started to see me. And we're going to go through physical health. We're going to go through mental health. We're going to go through addiction of any sort, any kind. And then I make a personalized plan with you for you because I'm a firm believer that that person has to live their life. Their life is going to look different than the next one, than the next one, than the next one. So there's never going to be any cookie cutter thing to me that I can say, here, do this, and everything's going to go great from now on. So the assessment to me is more about understanding, what has been your longest period of sobriety. If it's been a week, let's talk about what you did for that week and let's try to build on that. If you have had no periods of sobriety, let's talk about what you normally do as your coping skill. Besides that, if there's nothing else, let's start at some very basic coping skills. So, and then the other part of being a Black practitioner is you find that there's not a lot of literature out there already specifically for Black people as far as like the workbooks and the textbooks that have been written that you can normally just, take a few worksheets and send. So I find myself making a lot of my own stuff to give to my patients because I'm like, no, this is not culturally sensitive. So I'm not going to even give them this cookie cutter way of dealing with a situation that is not going to relate to them. So I often do a lot of that. And like you said, specifically being in New Orleans for the second piece, we have a really, really, really honest conversation. I'm gonna let you know, look, I'm not here to judge you at all. Just because, that's your vice, you don't know what mine is. So we all got something we're going through. All got something we don't. So walk me through a typical drinking day for you. What usually triggers it? What can we do to lessen it? Because a lot of times it's helping them to understand that they have other coping skills that they don't even know they had. A lot of people will say, it's the only thing I know how to do. I've been doing it since I was 12 years old. Well, let's walk through that. This had to be some part of your life that you were doing something positive, and let's draw from it. And so many times I see that light bulb go off, and that's like the most rewarding thing ever. You see that light bulb go off, and then you can say, hey, okay, well, I know you work in the French Quarter, you work at a bar. What can we do to help you lessen that? Which, hey, people have to work, and sometimes we can't just say, quit your job. A lot of people will be like, well, they just can't do that. They can't work there. It's not ideal. I never said it's ideal, but there are ways we can put into some little roadblocks. Maybe we can have you just being a server or something that doesn't keep you behind the bar, or have you a buddy system at work to where somebody helps to keep you sober. Uh, just little, 10-minute reflections you can maybe go and do. 15-second breathing in the bathroom. There's a lot of different things we can do to make this better for you, a lot easier for you. Now, may you stumble? You might, but I want you to know, come back. Don't ever feel like you can't come back. Come back and we'll start again. We'll start again every time.
No, I love that. We every so often you not even every so often, pretty often you'll hear of folks who relapse, right? Like they're in an environment, they get triggered, and they're back
Yeah.
to a lot of their old ways. How do you support someone who? Because I mean that's really demoralizing, right? Like especially if after
Yeah.
you've gotten a certain amount of time under your belt, where you feel like you're doing all the right things, and then something comes out of left field, it completely turns you rolled upside down, and you feel like you're kind of right back at square one. How do you
Yeah.
support someone in that position from a practitioner perspective, where they've seemingly like lost most of their hope? They're dealing with a lot of the shame
Yeah.
that comes with taking that kind of that U-turn backwards. How do you help somebody kind of get back on the right track when they've gotten to a place where it's extremely dark?
Yeah. Well, first, I normalize it. I think a lot of times we don't always discuss the fact that for most people, relapse is a piece of recovery. Most people, once they stop, and I think first of all, people in recovery are some of the strongest people I've ever met in my life. But most people, once they stop, something does happen. I've had patients who, a parent has died. It's extremely triggering. So I normalize that, and I'll say, hey, you went through something extremely traumatic, and you found out yesterday that, your mom, the only parent you had left, has passed away. You called me because you took a drink. And that's some strength. That's some strength. And I want you to understand that we all are going to experience things. We all may fall, but we can come back. Even though it's not, maybe as life altering. I often talk to people about it's almost the same thing as when you are trying to lose weight and you go on a diet and you have a bad day at work or something bad happens and food is usually your comfort. You probably won't stick to eating that salad, and that's normal. But how do we regroup and get back to what is going to work for you? So if you've slipped and you've taken that drink and you really want to go back to the place you were before, we'll start again. And it's okay to start back at day one because you can't get back to those 60 days you had before if we don't start again. So that's the most important thing is normalizing it, taking away that shame and guilt because there shouldn't be shame and guilt involved in relapse. First of all, addiction is a disease, and like any other disease, you may have a relapsing part of it. So I often talk to people before they even relapse about the normalcy of that and how we can always get back. We can always start again. Just stay alive and come back to me. That's all I ask. And once you do that, we're gonna work on this together. And I promise you, we can get you back to that time plus more.
You look at it as someone having to basically start from zero, or are they picking up where they left off? I feel like for me, I would feel more confident walking back into a situation where I'm like, all right, I had a stumble, I'm gonna pick up where I left off. I had, let's just call it 30 days under my belt,
Yeah,
right? I down one day, right? But I still had 30. Let me pick back up where I left off, taking that into consideration, as opposed to feeling as though that I got to go all the way back to day one. I mean, and especially for those who
yeah,
are, a little bit longer term, maybe they have a couple of years. I mean,
yeah.
that's a huge degree of weight to hold, to be like, all right, I got to go all the way back to day one, as opposed to saying, you know what, I had one day where I was not living in in the truth that I've tried to create for myself. Let me pick back up from that day. I mean, what's your perspective on that, and how you would advise, someone who's in that position?
That's why one of the first things we talk about is, do you have any time under your belt? What has that time looked like? Because what I'm actually doing is I'm building this big, beautiful piece of you've had 30 days of you've had this. So when this relapse does happen, we're going to pull that back up and I'm going to share that to you. And I'm going to say, look, you were able to do this. You were able to do this before. You can do this again. These were all the great things that you were able to do. These were all of the great coping skills you had. And we can pick back up from there. It's not starting from day one. Now, the only time I do have that is if somebody has a specific program for themselves in which they count it as starting back from day one. But for me, no, no, I'm not about to let you throw away those 30 days like they did not happen because 30 days without doing something you may have did for years is an extremely long time. And I would not want to discount that ever. And like you said, if years, now I might argue with you there because even if your program says you starting over again, I'm gonna say, well, over here by Jeny, you're not. So over there, over there, you
Yeah.
do what you want, but over here we count these 5 years. So that's between you and that program. But over here, we're gonna count them 5 years, and we're gonna explore. all of the things that you accomplished, even if those things were getting out of bed and taking care of your hygiene and taking care of your kids or whatever it was without that drink that you were so used to supporting you and so used to taking away that anxiety, so used to taking away any depression to where you didn't even know you had it. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
feel like everyone needs hope, right? And I don't, this. I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to programs that people could get on to get sober and recover and
Mhm.
continue to develop. So, however you can get there, I think it's do it
Yeah.
if you need to. But I think that hope plays a large part in someone being able to stay their own
Yeah.
course. And I would, putting myself in in the shoes of someone in a program where I feel as though that I got to regress back to day one just to take a step forward. That would just be
Yeah.
a really hard pill to swallow. So I appreciate your perspective and your mode where you're just like, you know what, over here with Jeny, we're going to build on what we've already built out as opposed to
Yeah.
taking you back down.
Because I think
Makes a lot of sense.
that's very hard. Yeah, like you said, that's very makes you feel defeated and it takes that hope away. And I never want to be a part of taking anyone's hope away. My job is to help you build on what you already have, help you see what you may not even see in yourself as great and what you can build on. So yeah, no, I'm not, like I said, I try to respect it, but at a certain point I'm gonna be like, you still got that time over here. So we can agree to disagree on it. So
I I
we'll
I
do it
I,
like that.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about like common misconceptions about the process of recovery and the process of dealing with mental health. Like what do you see in from your perspective again, and how can we better educate people around some of these issues, particularly in communities of color where it off these both of these buckets are oftentimes extremely foreign concepts for us. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about
First of all, I'll say with mental health, it means you're crazy. If you have to seek help for any reason, it's automatically like this. Something is wrong with you. You're crazy. Switch. And that's the most inaccurate thing I've ever heard. And if I can spread anything to anyone, it's no, that is not true at all. Most of us, all of us should go to our primary care physician. We don't always go because something wrong. Sometimes we need an annual. Sometimes we may have a little cold. There's different reasons why we go, but it doesn't just make us this broken person. So mental health is the same way. Having a depressive disorder does not make you crazy or broken. Even schizophrenia does not make you crazy or broken. So that's really what I would like to get out to people. It does not equate to the same thing, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. And then I would say with addiction, one of the biggest things is it does not happen in communities of color. That it's always I'm like, where have y'all been living? 'Cause,
It's
yeah,
funny that you say that because like even if you look at the studies and as they kind of pull out the percentage of populations, whether
hmm
you're looking at white folks, black folks, indigenous, so on and so forth, they always say that addiction is there are lower levels of addiction in the black community, but I'm just like, where are
it's
they getting these numbers from? Because I
it's
mean, I don't know.
mm-mm.
You talk to me about that because I remember reading that line a couple
Yeah,
years
and being
ago,
like, what?
and I was just like, that doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. So I don't. Addiction doesn't exist in the black community. What do you say about that?
I say, first of all, it's inaccurate. A lot of times, these studies are geared towards people who are not of color. That's the first problem. Second problem, historically, communities of color do not trust systems in which I have to write down personal information because of, obvious historical things that have happened. So imagine if somebody's undocumented and you're telling them, here, tell me how much you drink, tell me how much you do. So
Right.
no way I'm going to give you that information. I I've been taught to shrink into the back and that I shouldn't even really let people see me. Or, a black mom who's a single mom, she does not want to fill out certain things that could bring DCFS into her home and etc. So whenever you read those kind of studies, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them, we have to take that into account. It's just the fact of people don't typically, and even if there's ones that's done in residential treatment, we're underrepresented in residential treatment. So therefore we're underrepresented in these studies. So it's a lot of that could lead to the myth of uh, people of color do not experience addiction. It's not true. It happens, and it happens across every substance use disorder. I have seen everyone from, opioid use to benzodiazepines, alcohol. It doesn't matter. It penetrates every area. And the problem is, since we don't talk about it, it perpetuates the narrative of it doesn't happen. And so that's how we end up with these studies that look like this.
Man, I feel like there needs to be, some sort of a commission study that focuses specifically on people of color as it relates to a lot of the substances that you just mentioned, so that we have a more accurate and perhaps even more trustworthy, source of
Yes, source
truth.
of truth.
You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Than what's currently available out there. I mean, it's almost an exploded version of you not having workbooks and tools to be able to share
Yeah,
with your patients on a much higher systemic societal level. I mean, what is your perspective, and how can we educate our community more so? But in addition to that, how do we educate the broader ecosystem? Because I think that the challenges that we often find is that people don't feel as though that this is for them because
yeah,
it hasn't been packaged in a way where it's for them, right? You feel like
yeah,
you're on the outside of being able to see someone for your health, your mental
yeah.
health. I mean, we're already apprehensive about going into the doctor for our physical health. Forget about
Hmm.
the mental. So how, so talk about, like, what do you think needs to be done to better educate internally within our community,
Yeah,
and then how do we kind of kick that outwards where we start creating a seat at the table for ourselves to be able to have a very, because ultimately what's going to happen is that like anything else, when we're not part of the conversation, we're an afterthought, if a thought at all, right?
yeah.
So what's your thought, from the standpoint of trying to carve out that space from someone whose profession it is to be able to take care of these folks?
It's a big job. Let me say that. It's going to take all of us being honest and open. But just what you're doing, having a podcast specifically about alcohol use and what it looks like in the Black community, I can tell you, hmm, that doesn't happen often. So just things like this make a huge difference in just stopping the stigma on a larger level. I'm seeing more now amongst like SAMHSA, the Mental Health Administration, of starting to say, hey, we do need to carve out more grants specifically for Indigenous people, for, African American people. And then we can have more of a holistic and, accurate study. So that's happening a little bit more now, specifically since opioid use disorder became such a big deal within the white community. And so it wasn't this, lock them up, drugs are bad thing anymore as much. So now we need to do studies and now we need to understand. And so out of that, that's the good thing that I say has come out of that is recognizing that the larger community does need help and that substance use disorder is not necessarily something that people need to go to jail for. It's a disease. And along with that disease comes certain symptoms. So if people are, doing things that are not in the community norm, it's likely because of that disease. So let's treat the disease and not just the symptom. Um, I've noticed and I've followed a lot more, bills in Congress and stuff that are aiming more towards earmarking money for African Americans and other people of color when it comes to addiction. So it's slow, but it's happening. Um, but on a personal level, as far as like other practitioners, normalize it. Even if addiction is not your thing, you can do a screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment called SBIRT. It's a very quick check off that you can do with people that gives them the opportunity to say, yeah, I do drink. Yeah, I do drink more than 6 beers a day. And then you can open up and have that conversation and refer them out as necessary. Because I know everyone is not going to feel comfortable having the conversation, but this little, 10-second check mark thing can really change someone's life
Sorry,
because
what is that
yeah,
again?
it's called SBIRT, SBIRT, and it's screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. Actually, Some PCPs do it, some don't, but you can also just look it up, Google it, and you can do it yourself, and you can have a better understanding of what your, alcohol use may look like, and whether or not you do need some help. So,
We'll
because
we'll we'll,
normally it
we'll
doesn't always come up.
Yeah, we'll pull that and leave it as a link in the show notes so that
Oh,
people. I
perfect.
mean, I
Thank you.
think resources are super important, right? Like I feel as though that there's like many things in for folks of color, there's just a literacy gap, right? And
Yes.
whether it's financial literacy, this that like it's mental health, and I think and substance abuse literacy
Yeah.
deficiency in our community. And yes, we want to normalize it, but I think that we also need to share the resources out there so that people can start educating themselves, and not even just
Definitely.
necessarily the folks who are like in it themselves, but like the support around them, right? Family members,
Yeah.
friends, need to understand what the language is so that we can create spaces that these people feel comfortable coming to,
Yes.
to us as their support network, to be able to hold their hand in this journey, because it's not going to come necessarily from the outside. Is
Yeah.
something that I feel like is very, 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 very prevalent, and I think we can all agree with that. So I think so. SBIRT. We'll drop that in the
Hmm.
show notes. I think that's good for people to be able to assess themselves.
Yeah. And I actually also do work with families of people who are going through substance use disorder, because they can sometimes be my worst, my worst patients, because they don't understand what it looks like, things that come out of it. And so they then in turn make the patient feel so horrible. If they do relapse, they don't feel comfortable coming back and saying, "Hey, I did, but I've started back again and I'm still going strong, and I'm still picking back up." And we have to create that comfortable space for the conversation. And like you said, literacy is going to be very important for people to understand, you know, how does alcohol affect certain things, and how does, certain medications, even once you abuse them, what they look like. And so it's very important.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you are, we'd really love it if you could leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcast or a rating on Spotify. And of course, please feel free to invite somebody into the conversation. If you feel like you have a story to share on the podcast, why not apply to be a guest? You can do so by completing the form on the podcast description, or find it on stackanddays.com. That's STACKNDAYS.com. But for now, let's jump back into the conversation. Yeah, I'm as I mentioned before we started here and on the call. I'm here in Colorado, and we have a high school. It's the 5280 high school. It's a recovery high school, so it brings in children, effectively children, high school age children, and it's a whole program curriculum for them to conduct their academics. But on the side, it also supports them in their mental health and their recovery
That's
journey.
amazing.
It's super amazing. I actually spent some time with them a couple weeks ago, and hopefully we'll have their director on the podcast in April sometime to talk more about the program, but also his own journey with alcohol and substance abuse. But one of the things that I've just found in doing this podcast is that I'm oftentimes talking to people who are in my demographic, right? But the
Um,
people who are in my demographic who are struggling with these issues oftentimes started this back in their teens when they were in high
yeah,
school. So like, do you see that in your world where you're seeing these folks younger and younger? And I'm not just talking about alcohol. I mean, because we know that opioids are a huge
yeah,
issue, for young folks. But what do you see from a practitioner's standpoint as it relates to the earlier demographics and their mental health with this very different world that they're living in, and
yeah.
also the substance use that oftentimes comes on the back of that?
First of all, adolescents, teens, they are living in a very, very different world than it almost feels like it's, two generations difference instead. After COVID, that isolation changed, mental health for a lot of them. And so now they're trying to battle anxiety. But imagine trying to battle anxiety while also, constantly having access to scrolling everyone else's life and comparing yourself and feeling like you don't measure up and feeling like you are not doing good enough at school, and then your parents are on you. So I know we often give teens a hard time. Like, well, what you got to worry about? You don't have no bills. But they have a lot to worry about. They have a lot that they are dealing with. And, in Louisiana, the average person starts to drink between the ages of 10 to 12 years old. And that's, brain is not any kind of way developed. So it's a very necessary conversation amongst teens. And now with vaping becoming, more apparent, it's more important that we really knock down those walls and say, hey, you probably have tried. You probably have thought about it. You probably have. Let's have the conversation. We can't do things, the way they were done necessarily when I was younger. I did not have the same pressures that, a child growing up today would have. I didn't have a way to access the entire world in a millisecond. That's a lot of stress. That's a lot of anxiety when you can see, what someone is doing millions and millions of miles away that you're not doing. And now you're internalizing that. That is terrifying. And people use substances for a reason. And usually that reason is because they don't want to feel something. So teens may not know any other coping skills. So I am going to drink or I'm going to smoke or I'm going to pop pills because I'm tired of feeling like I'm not good enough. I'm tired of feeling the anxiety that comes with next time I, look at TikTok, she gonna be with this one or he gonna be with that one. Just teenage stuff is now so much more powerful. And they start there and then next thing you know, get to college, they still using it for another reason. And then, they grow up and, now you got kids and you're using it for this reason. And before you know it, it's followed you your whole life, all because it was never talked about or even, expressed that, hey, you could come to me for help if you ever feel like it. And for that reason, I do see adolescents in my practice. Most people don't. I do because I'm not going to sit here and look at statistics that say, 10 to 12 is when they start drinking, but I'm not going to start seeing people in my practice till they're 21. Does not make sense to me personally. So
Yeah.
that's also what I look at.
Yeah, the lifeline that you just laid out is exactly my lifeline. Um, I'm, I, I mean, I don't know what I would have done if I had TikTok and Instagram available to me when I was 12, 13 years old. You got this world and this that exists now that creates this concept. I mean, it might seem like cliche, but it's constantly creating this concept that people are not enough. You're
Yeah,
not beautiful enough. You're not as far along enough. You're not going to be able to
yeah,
attain success because you're not doing this at this age. And for a child, let's call them what they are.
yeah.
For a child who is at a point in their life when they're trying to determine their own measurements
Who
for
they are
self-worth.
themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah, they don't
you
even
know
know yet.
you don't even know. It's just a recipe for disaster. So I mean, I'm sure that you see it all the time. I know that I lived my own version of that, and in seeing, I'm glad that there are some resources now in place for some of these
Yeah,
children. I think there's only, I don't know, 70 some odd schools around the country that do this sort of thing. But
yeah,
we know that there are kids probably in most schools that are battling it, right? Whether
yes,
it's, and even if it's not the substance use and addiction, certainly mental health is a problem,
definitely.
for
More kids
adolescents.
are, ending their lives than ever before. And to me, that's the real epidemic that we need to pay attention to. Like you said, being able to access everyone else's life and not even know who you are, that's terrible.
You talked about working with families beforehand. It's like I feel like that's the first line of defense
Yeah,
when it comes to a lot of this, particularly in our community, because we are so kind of close knit. And I've said for a minute now, like silence has been the coping mechanism, in communities of color. Like, what is your perspective? How do you overcome, how do you blow this up to a point where people are willing to look at it in its face as opposed to cowering away and running into the corner? Like, I feel like we need to just be, uncomfortable and
yeah,
view this for what it is, unless we're just going to have, more of our community dying earlier and earlier for something that maybe we would not necessarily be able to prevent, but we'd be able to manage, right?
yeah, yeah. So that's why it's so important to me to work with families, because, culturally we are pretty tight knit. And so if your sister or your mom or whoever is battling with this and they don't have your support, that's that's likely going to cause you to go the other way. So I'll work with that person individually first, and then eventually we'll bring the family in, and I can say, hey, I know you love XYZ, and this is what they're going through. I just wanted to make sure you felt okay supporting them, and if you have all the tools you need. And surprisingly, even though it's something we're pretty tight knit and quiet about in our culture, they are like, okay, thank you, because I really don't know what to do. My mama was an alcoholic, but we just never talked about it. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it. And let's talk about how it's passed down within families. And let's talk about how it matters how we describe people and how we talk about what their disease is. And so we can have those conversations. And a lot of times they, like I said, are very thankful. With kids, teens, if I can't work with the family, I can't work with the team because, I need to know that mom, dad, grandmother, whoever is the support system for them understands how to talk to them about this. They need to understand that this is not something you can beat out of them. This is not something that you can necessarily punish out of them. We need to be able to treat it as what it is and get them the coping skills that they need to replace this. And as a family, we need communication and coping skills. So yeah, it's surprising that, a lot of times they have just they don't know. So when you don't know something and you don't want to admit you don't know something, you just act a certain way towards it. So when I bring them and say, hey, I understand you may not know, and that's very normal, I want to help you understand and I want to help you know how to support your sister or your mom or your cousin or whoever it may be or your brother. And they are like, oh, well, okay, I can do that.
I love that. I want to stay on that as we kind of close out here. And I usually ask a series of questions when I'm closing out conversations with folks who have battled their own substances. But I'll flip it a little bit and ask you
Okay.
in a different way. For someone who is struggling really kind of in the midst of their own disease, as a family member looking in on them, how would you know that, what are some of the signs to know that they're struggling without them explicitly telling you so?
Biggest thing is going to be changes in their behavior. Um, I think if a person is usually very regimented and all of a sudden it seems like they're kind of not, or what teens always tell parents, if you noticing that your kid is sick more often and needs to stay home more often, it's probably they might have a hangover and you don't even realize it. Also, besides behaviors, you can pay attention to sight, sound, and smell. Don't try to ignore that you smell alcohol somewhere. Yeah, I really feel like I smell this and I don't. And
If it
just
looks
be,
like a duck and it quacks like a
it
duck.
quacks like a duck, it's likely a duck. So don't try to talk yourself out of that. And the biggest one to me is if you notice when you guys go out or even if you're at home, that person seems to drink excessively. It's worth a conversation. Even if it may not be a substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder, it's worth a conversation to say, hey, because even if you're just getting to the bottom of why you feel like you need to drink that much today. I know we out having fun, but why you felt like 5 shots of tequila was appropriate? Like, have that conversation. And it probably does not need to be while they're inebriated and we're in the middle of the club. Wait and tell them
Yeah.
a more comfortable spot. We might just be, chilling, having some fun, and then you can say, hey, last week I noticed, blah, blah, blah. Anything I can do to help? And just that sentence can make a person put their defenses down and say, you know what, actually, this is going on, this is going on, this is going on. And then we can go from there.
Yeah. I think those were all extremely valuable, particularly the eye and smell test.
Yeah.
I think we're almost 50 episodes. No one's mentioned that, so I think that's a valuable
Okay.
flag for people to pay attention to. And so one more on the mental health piece, because I think, in our community also, oftentimes, we don't address someone's mental health until it's too late. Right.
Yeah.
So what would you prescribe, someone looking in from the outside to support someone in their mental health journey when there seems to be something that needs to be addressed there?
Well, first, I think the way to normalize mental health is just to have conversations, whether you think something is wrong or not. Um, yeah, I have a 16-year-old, and every day we are going to talk about not just how did school go, anything within school happen made you feel uncomfortable. Is there anything I can do to better support you? Is this happening to a friend that, maybe may need to get some help? All of those kind of conversations. So I'm not going to wait until it feels like something is wrong. I'm going to make it so normal. So that way, when he does feel it, the first thing he's going to do is come to me and say, "Hey, mom, this happened, and I'm not feeling good. I'm not feeling like myself today." And then we can go from there. Um, but if that's not something that you have necessarily practiced with a person, you can still say, "Hey, I just wanted to tell you today, I love you. And if there's anything I can do to help, I'm here." Even if, you may not know whether or not it is or it isn't. That's the way we normalize it. It's just like if you saw somebody hurt their foot and you say, "Oh, is it broken? Do you need to go to the hospital?" That's not something we think about a second time. But if we see someone who seems to have a couple of bad days in a row, we don't say, "Hey, seems like this is, been a couple of bad days where you just haven't been yourself. You think maybe we need to, do something a little different, whatever that might look like for you, whatever makes you comfortable." So it's just really, I can't say it enough, normalizing talking about mental health as we would, uh, just like anything else. So it has to be a part of the normal conversation.
No, I agree. I love that. Um, for someone who's sitting there listening to this, and they are thinking to themselves, I feel like I got something I need to address here,
Yeah.
um, but I just don't even know what the first step could be, could look like. What would you suggest to that person?
Although there's a few things I would suggest. There are so many online tools that you can do a self-assessment just to see, and it gives you a score. And according to that score, it'll let you know you do kind of drink excessively, or ooh, you do seem to have depression or anxiety. So you can even start right there. Google a couple of assessments of, do I have anxiety? Do I have depression? Do I have a substance use disorder? If you're not comfortable doing something like that, I'm on Instagram. I take DMs, reach out to me. I'll help guide you, even if you're not in Louisiana. I'm not just a person to where I'm like, oh, if they're not a potential client. No, I really just want people to get better. So that's also an option. Um, 988 is also for behavioral health. It's not necessarily, doesn't have to be an emergency. If you just feel like you need someone to talk to, you need guidance according to where you are, 988 works all over the United States. So that's another good resource. And the fact that you may be saying, "Oh, I wonder," it probably means you need to take one of those routes and just make sure. Um, and just make sure that's nothing you need to address. Or even if you want to help someone else who you think may have something to address, go ahead and have that conversation with them too, because it can save a life. It really, really can.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are super value. I love that 988. We'll drop that in the show notes as well.
Okay.
Um, last question I have for you: what are some of the hopes and aspirations that you have for the future of recovery and sobriety and mental health from a professional practitioner standpoint?
Oh, so if I had my magic wand, let's see.
You have it now. You have it now.
My magic wand. Uh, what I would like to see is more representation of people of color in those spaces as practitioners, as patients, as nurses, whatever it is. I want to see more representation of it. And I want it to be culturally sensitive and culturally informed so that no one feels like there's a wrong door to go. So that whatever door they open is the right door for them. That's really, really what I want. I want mental health and, substance abuse to talk to be so normal that we are at the cookout saying, "Oh, I had therapy the other day, and let me tell you, this happened." And, oh, You want a beer? Oh no, actually I decided to stop drinking 30 days ago and nobody look at them crazy. I just I want it to be that normal, you know. You want some ribs? Yes, but I don't want a beer. And we can go from there and everybody's happy.
That sounds like a little bit of utopia.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Jeny, where can folks find you? I want to make sure that they can get at you if they need.
Sure. The name of my practice is A Pathway to Life Counseling. You can find me on all social platforms, Jeny, which is Jeny, Rodrigue, RODRIGUE _therapist. And that's on all platforms. That's just to make it easier. So
Awesome. Well, look, Jeny, I know we had to kind of narrow in here, and we finally caught each other, and we're able to spend some
yeah,
time chatting. So thank you very much for coming on to Stacking Days.
thank you. It's a great conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, y'all. Stay tuned for next week. We'll have another great conversation. And until then, be well, one day at a time. Peace. I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices in healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.